Chapter 1337. However, as soon as Feng Ling's voice fell, the man suddenly held her waist. The moment she paused, he pressed her into his arms. Feng Ling asked in a low voice, "What are you doing?" Before she could finish her words, the man's burning kiss pressed down. Li Nanheng held her waist with one hand and clasped her chin with the other, forcing her to raise her head and accept his surging kiss. Feng Ling's lips were slightly open because she hadn't finished speaking. As a result, he easily pried open her teeth, entangled her tongue, pressed against the root of her tongue, and sucked hard as though he wanted to swallow her whole. Feng Ling anxiously grunted. Her instinctive reaction was to quickly turn off the power of the ironing machine. Otherwise the shirt would definitely be ruined. Under her resistance, the man seemed to instantly understand her main intention. He still held her tightly with one hand and reached out with the other to press the switch under the ironing machine. As he cut off the power, he held her tightly. Li Nanheng's domineering kiss almost swept away all her dazed emotions. His hot and strong breath filled her mouth, causing her entire body to tremble instinctively. All her strength seemed to be taken away by this man in an instant. Feng Ling's legs softened. As the man's kiss deepened, it inexplicably reminded her of the time when she lived in the jungle. Every time she wanted to sleep well at night, he would kiss her until her entire body went limp and she had no choice but to go to bed with him. It was precisely because of those memories that Feng Ling's entire body instinctively softened because of the familiar feeling of the past. Because he kissed her too fiercely, his heavy breathing brushed against her facial features, forcing her to unknowingly burst into tears. More importantly, the man carried her and turned to sit on the fabric sofa at the side. She was forcefully pressed onto his lap and held in his arms. There was almost no space between the two of them, and they were tightly pressed against each other. The place under her body that was pressed against her was an existence that couldn't be ignored. As the man kissed her deeply, it became more and more aggressive. It was as though he was ready to give her a fatal blow at any time. Feng Ling pressed her hands against the man's hard chest. She could only hear his deep breathing and the ambiguous sound of their lips and tongues touching. Even her resisting whimpers were completely blocked by his mouth. Li Nanheng's scorching palm was branded on her waist. As though he was still not satisfied, his hand moved heavily on her body. Feng Ling was forced to lean against him to welcome another wave of hot kisses. After a long time, Li Nanheng finally let go of her red and swollen lips. He panted, his deep and dark gaze still on her face. At this time, Feng Ling was finally able to take a good breath. "I just sat on the sofa and kissed you for a while. What's with your gaze? It's as if I bullied you. I'm coaxing you like this. How do I look like I'm bullying you?" As he spoke, he pressed her even more tightly in his arms, letting her feel the urgency somewhere in his body. Feng Ling's body immediately stiffened and she quickly stood up. The man looked at her familiar appearance and didn't want to feel all the changes in his body. He then looked at her red and swollen lips and messy hair and couldn't help chuckling softly. He stroked her cheek and his hot breath brushed against her face. "If you have the patience to iron my clothes, why can't you have some patience to feel my heart for you? How long do you want to keep me cold?" Feng Ling quickly stood up. Halfway up, she was pulled back into his arms by the man. This time, she did not sit on him but lay down in his arms. The man pushed the dining cart to the dining table and placed the dishes on the table one by one. Feng Ling went over to help. After putting it away, Li Nanheng opened a bottle of red wine. In order not to let Feng Ling notice his intention to get her drunk, he poured her a small glass and said, "Try it. How does it taste?" Feng Ling saw that the red wine was only at the bottom of the glass, so she picked it up and drank it. After tasting it, she said, "It's very delicious." "Really?" Li Nanheng poured himself a glass and tasted it. It was indeed not bad. He asked her, "Do you want more?" Feng Ling glanced at him. "You ordered 2 bottles and asked me if I wanted more." The man smiled, but he smiled because this girl would never escape his trap. He poured her more than half a glass and carefully reminded her, "Drink slowly. Don't drink too fast." Feng Ling did not speak. She sat down and picked up the cutlery. Without saying much, she ate as though she was about to leave. Li Nanheng did not say much. The entire dinner was very peaceful. The dishes tasted good and the taste was what both of them liked. Li Nanheng drank a lot of the 2 bottles of wine. Feng Ling saw that he did not seem drunk. With his alcohol tolerance, it was indeed not easy for him to get drunk, but her alcohol tolerance was. However, this wine was really delicious. Although her alcohol tolerance was not good, the more she tried to control herself from drinking, the more she couldn't control herself when she encountered such delicious red wine. Li Nanhing knew that Feng Ling's alcohol tolerance was not good, so he did not urge her to drink. He just sat there and drank slowly. During this period, Feng Ling also poured 2 glasses for herself. After 2 glasses, she seemed to be controlling herself and did not touch it for a long time. However, seeing that Li Nanhing had drunk more than half of the wine, she couldn't help but pour another glass and sip slowly. She was like a child who knew that she could not eat too much sugar but was afraid that it would be bad to eat too much, so she could only take small bites. She was so cute that Li Nanhing felt his heart ache. In the end, Feng Ling almost drank half of the 2 bottles of wine. She realized that she had drunk a lot. The bottle of red wine was not small and the capacity was not small. She immediately put down the wine glass and did not dare to touch it again. She turned to drink the soup. Li Nanhing sat quietly opposite her. He had been eating and drinking well. He just looked at her quietly. Feng Ling's face turned red. She suddenly put down the cutlery, stood up and said, "I'm done eating. I'm going back." Li Nanhing still sat in his original position. He crossed his arms and quietly watched her turn to walk out. The direction of her walking was very accurate, directly toward the door. Her steps were very steady but the video was a little straight. The man raised his eyebrows. Feng Ling, N. Chapter 1340. Li Nanhing took a deep breath in her palm. The pent-up emotions that he had been tortured by this woman for so many years suddenly surged up. She was bad but he was worse than her. And so, Feng Ling trembled when the man suddenly licked her palm. She stared at him blankly. "What are you doing?" The man raised his brows. She did not move her hand away, and his actions were even more excessive. She quickly retracted her hands. Her face was already slightly red from the alcohol, and now it was even redder. She abruptly stood up and looked like she was about to leave. However, before she could take a step, Yu Zheng knocked on the door. Feng Ling was stunned again. She suddenly turned back to look at Li Nanhing and said, "Is Mr. Mike here again?" Li Nanhing. It was obvious that Yu Zheng was knocking on the door. He was probably preparing to come in and take away the dining car. Was her memory messed up after drinking too much, or was it because the incident of hiding from Mr. Mike had left a deep impression on her? Then Feng Ling abruptly reached out to drag Li Nanhing, who was sitting on the sofa, and pushed him toward the bedroom. After entering the bedroom, she hurriedly pushed him onto the bed. "Li Nanhing? Hide in." She pushed him onto the bed, lifted the blanket, and covered him with it. Then she turned back to look at the bedroom door. As though she was avoiding an enemy, she carefully ran down and locked the door. Then she returned to the bed and looked at the man who had revealed his head from under the blanket. She was about to speak when she suddenly froze. "No, I should be the one hiding?" Li Nanhing raised his brows and looked at the little cutie in front of him. He patted the spot beside him and made an inviting gesture. "Yes, do you want to come in and hide?" "All right," she answered very quickly. After all, his arm was injured but she was not. She nimbly took off her shoes and went to bed. She lifted the blanket and covered herself with it. She lay down beside him and held her breath to prevent others from discovering her. The quilt covered both of them in darkness. The air was thin and very quiet. They were too close. In such a narrow space with little air, Feng Ling's heartbeat could almost be heard. It was very quiet. It's hot too. The whole world seemed to be isolated by this quilt, but it also seemed like this kind of belonging gave people a strange sense of security. She stayed under the blanket for a while but she didn't hear anything. She thought about it and quickly lifted the blanket to take another look. However, just as she raised her hand to lift the blanket, the man beside her, whose breathing had gradually become heavy, suddenly turned over and pressed her down. The blanket was still not lifted. In this dark and narrow space, it was a little stuffy and hot, but the man's scorching kiss pressed down without hesitation. Feng Ling lay motionless and accepted the man's kiss. Feeling that his face was indeed hot, she couldn't help but ask, "Won't it be a problem if it keeps burning?" Momo 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 mother momo momo ill and mother, up 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 up. Feng Ling had never taken care of a child before, and this was the first time she had encountered such a sick child. Thankfully, Yu Zheng's words were clear and simple, which put her at ease. "Momo, be good. Auntie will accompany you in the hospital tonight, okay?" Feng Ling kissed the little guy's face again. Little Momo did not speak. He hugged her neck and cried aggrievedly. From time to time he would reach out to touch his own butt. It seemed like the injection was really painful. Feng Ling touched his little butt, lowered her head and whispered in his ear, Does it hurt? Little Momo choked up again. He sniffled in her arms and said, "And Momo, it hurts, little pitiful." Feng Ling touched him again, her heart aching. She turned back and asked a few more questions. After confirming that she could carry little Momo to a resting room near the emergency room or a quiet ward for the child to rest, she carried Momo upstairs to find a ward. Originally she wanted to put little Momo on the bed, but he refused to let go. He even hugged her neck tightly and sobbed. Feng Ling couldn't bear to see him like this. She simply hugged him and coaxed him. At the same time she instructed Yu Zheng to buy food for little Momo. He had just been injected with a fever, so there were many things that he couldn't eat randomly. Yu Zheng went out for a long time before he bought something edible. He also bought a lot of toys that little boys liked, such as cars, planes, and so on. Little Momo's eyes lit up when he saw the toys, but he couldn't bear to leave Feng Ling's embrace. He struggled for a long time until Feng Ling said, "Momo, sit here and play with the toys. Andy won't leave. Andy won't be so busy recently. I can have a lot of time to accompany you, okay?" The little guy finally let go and turned to focus on playing with the toys. Seeing that he was so sensible, he only cried when the injection hurt. After that, it no longer hurt and he didn't cry because he was sick. Other than asking adults to hug him, he only played with his toys. He was really a very obedient little baby. Feng Ling supported her chin with one hand and sat on the chair by the bed. She leaned against the table by the bed and looked at little Momo, who looked up at her blankly for help because he couldn't understand the new toy. It was a transformer toy. It seemed like its limbs could be removed to turn into a small car, but after removing it, it was a little difficult to restore it. Feng Ling had never played with it before and didn't know much about it. However, looking at the little guy's pleading expression, she couldn't help but reach over to play with him. In the end, after spending more than an hour, she still couldn't recover an arm or leg.